So picture this. It's the early 1890s, right?
Right, a very specific moment in time.
Exactly. We are talking more than 2 decades before the first trench is even dug in World War I.
Yeah, before anyone is really anticipating that scale of conflict.
And there's this 70-year-old man sitting in a totally crowded, manuscript-strewn study in London.
Oh, surrounded by just mountains of paper.
Literally mountains. And he's looking at European financial data, and he basically predicts a continental bloodbath.
With terrifying, almost mathematical precision, honestly.
Yeah, he doesn't just foresee a war. He maps out the exact mechanics of how, industrial competition and mass conscription are essentially locking these major powers into a suicide pact.
It's incredible, because usually when you think of someone in their 70s, it's a time to wind down.
Right, you hand the reins to the next generation, you sit back, maybe watch the world go by.
Exactly. But today, we're looking at a twilight period that defies literally every expectation of retirement.
We are plunging into the explosive final 5 years of the life of Friedrich Engels.
It's just an incredible period to study. I mean, from 1890 until his death in 1895, Engels is essentially operating as the central nervous system for this massive political earthquake.
A global earthquake, really?
Completely global. It's shaking the entire world.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to take you on a really granular, multi-layered exploration of Engels' final years.
And to do this, we are unpacking a really massive stack of historical texts.
We're focusing primarily on volume 27 of the Marx and Engels collected works, which we'll just call the MECW from here on out.
Right, along with a mountain of his daily correspondence from volumes 49 and 50.
Now, before we jump in, I want to be entirely clear on our lens for this conversation.
Yeah, that's really important here.
Because we are cracking open texts that deal intensely with Marxism, socialism, and the foundational theories of the working class movement.
Very politically charged material.
Exactly. So, just to set the ground rules for you listening, we are not here to take political sides today.
Not at all.
We're not endorsing these ideologies, and we're not condemning them either. Our objective is strictly impartial.
We're treating these texts as vital historical artifacts.
Right, an autopsy of the texts, basically. We want to understand the mechanics of the arguments, the geopolitical context they were forged in.
And really just look at the specific patterns of thought that, for better or worse, profoundly shaped the 20th century.
That analytical distance is exactly what we need for these sources.
It is. We have to look at the why and the how behind all these writings. I mean, we're examining an intellect trying to wrangle just an unprecedented amount of data.
And trying to hold a massive, fracturing political movement together at the same time.
Exactly.
So to understand what Engels was facing in November 1890, as he celebrates his 70th birthday, you first have to grasp the sheer velocity of the world around him.
The world is moving so fast.
Fast doesn't even cover it. For roughly 40 years prior to this, Engels and Karl Marx had been theorizing and organizing in conditions of either total obscurity or, intense state suppression.
A lot of exile, a lot of censorship.
Right. But as we read the letters from volume 49, this is spanning 1890 to 1892, that obscurity is violently shattered.
The theoretical suddenly becomes undeniably physical.
It's all spilling into the streets.
The landscape had completely transformed. You read these texts, and the sheer scale of the events he's referencing is staggering.
Like the May Day demonstrations, right?
Exactly. You have the first truly international May Day demonstrations in 1890. Millions of workers are coordinating strikes across Europe and America simultaneously.
Which had to be mind-blowing at the time.
It was unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
And in Germany, the state apparatus essentially blinks. Bismarck's anti-socialist law, which had literally criminalized socialist organizing for over a decade, is allowed to expire.
Just gone.
Just gone. And immediately after, the German Social Democrats achieved this massive, totally unexpected success in the Reichstag election.
They just surge into parliament.
They do. And meanwhile, in England, we see the eruption of what was called New Unionism.
Okay, what exactly was New Unionism?
It was essentially the foundation of massive trade unions organizing unskilled laborers. Before this, unions were mostly for skilled tradesmen. Organizing unskilled workers on this scale had never really been done successfully.
So it's this massive influx of raw, new energy.
Exactly.
I think the best way to understand Engels' position here for you listening, is to look at it through the lens of scaling a tech startup.
Oh, that's an interesting way to frame it.
Just imagine you've been in a cramped garage for 4 decades, coding a highly complex operating system that the general public either ignores or, actively hates.
Right, the state is actively trying to shut your servers down.
Exactly. And then, seemingly overnight, your software hits critical mass. You suddenly have millions of active users across all these different continents.
There's suddenly the operating system of the entire global working class movement.
Right. But with that massive, uncontrolled expansion comes a total nightmare of growing pains.
Oh, absolutely.
When I read his messages in volume 27, there's this message of greetings to the choir club of the Communist German Workers' Educational Society.
Yes, I know the one.
It doesn't read like a man taking a victory lap. It really reads like a chief architect desperately trying to stop his users from corrupting the core code.
That is the perfect analogy. And that corrupted code, in this historical context, took the form of ideological fracturing.
Which is inevitable, right, when a movement broadens its tent that much.
It always happens. This period saw the consolidation of the Second International, which brought together socialist and labor parties from all over the world.
But Engels immediately sees a structural vulnerability there.
He does. In the texts, especially if you look at the preface to Volume 27, he wages this fierce theoretical battle against what he calls the revival of opportunism and anarchism.
Let's break down the mechanics of that, because, opportunism just gets thrown around as a generic insult today.
A total buzzword.
Right. But Engels is using it to describe a very specific political mechanism. He's looking at these new German politicians sitting in the Reichstag and seeing a really dangerous incentive structure. Like, if you win parliamentary seats, the immediate, overwhelming pressure is to moderate your core principles.
Exactly. You want to keep those seats and pass incremental legislation.
You want to show you can play the game.
Right. Opportunism, as Engels analyzes it here, is the sacrifice of the movement's long-term objective, which is the fundamental restructuring of the capitalist economy in exchange for short-term, temporary political advantages.
It's essentially the desire to make socialism palatable to the very bourgeois establishment it was designed to overthrow.
Precisely. And Engels saw this creeping into the party press, into the leadership. He saw these leaders trying to file down the revolutionary edges of Marx's economic critiques just so they could play standard parliamentary politics.
Just watering down the theory to get along.
Exactly.
And then on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, he's fighting anarchism.
The other side of the coin.
Right. If opportunism is selling out to the establishment, anarchism is the ultra-radical reaction against that success.
Yes, it's the faction saying parliamentary politics is inherently corrupt. We need to abandon disciplined political organization entirely and just tear the state down tomorrow.
No compromises, no patience.
Right. It's a two-front war for Engels. He is battling those who want to integrate into the capitalist state and those who want to recklessly throw themselves against it without any real structural understanding of how power operates.
So for Engels, both of these factions suffered from the exact same fatal flaw, right?
They were both abandoning the scientific rigor of Marxist theory. They were operating on pure emotion and short-term political calculation.
Instead of a deep materialist analysis of history.
Exactly.
Which totally explains why he became so unbelievably militant about defending the exact letter of the written word.
He was a bulldog about it.
If you are fighting ideological dilution on a global scale, your foundational texts have to be utterly unassailable.
They have to be perfect.
Which brings us to a piece from volume 27 that, on its surface, has maybe the most sleep-inducing title imaginable.
Oh, I know where you're going.
It's called, quote, "In the Case of Brentano versus Marx, regarding alleged falsification of quotation."
Very catchy.
Right. But when you actually dive into it, it's like reading a gripping legal thriller about academic fraud.
It really is an incredibly intense text.
So who was Brentano? Let's set the stage for you.
So Louis Brentano was a prominent German economist of the Cathedral Socialist School.
Okay, Cathedral Socialist, what does that mean?
It translates roughly to socialists of the chair. Essentially, they were academics who advocated for state-led social reforms rather than outright revolution.
Ah, so the establishment's version of a socialist.
Exactly. And Brentano published this huge accusation that Karl Marx had deliberately doctored a quote from a speech given by the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, William Gladstone, way back in 1843.
Okay, and why did Marx use this quote in the first place?
He used it in Capital to demonstrate how the massive augmentation of national wealth in Britain was entirely confined to the property-owning classes, while the workers literally saw none of it.
And Brentano essentially calls Marx a liar.
He says Marx fabricated it. He claims Marx inserted a phrase about wealth being confined to the property classes that Gladstone never actually uttered.
Now, to you or me, arguing about a single sentence from a budget speech given 50 years prior seems completely absurd.
Seems like splitting hairs.
Right. But Engels stops his massive political operations to write a forensic, multi-page dossier tracking down this one single quote. Why?
Because it's a direct attack on the underlying methodology of capital.
It's not just about the quote.
No, you have to understand how Engels and Marx viewed their work. They didn't view themselves as mere political philosophers spinning utopian ideas. They viewed themselves as scientists, uncovering the structural laws of motion of the capitalist economy.
And in science, if your raw data is proven to be fabricated,
Your entire theoretical model is invalidated. Brentano wasn't just trying to correct the historical record. He was trying to prove that the foundational text of the working class movement was built on deliberate, calculated deception.
it's a precision strike on their credibility.
Exactly.
Because if Brentano can successfully plant the seed that Marx lies about his economic data, then the opportunists and the establishment politicians can just safely ignore the entire critique of political economy.
They can just write it off as propaganda.
So Engels essentially goes into full investigative mode.
He absolutely does. In the section called Story and Documents, Engels meticulously cross-references different editions of Hansard, which are the official parliamentary transcripts.
Right.
He cross-references those against multiple contemporary newspaper reports from the Times and the Morning Star from the exact day of Gladstone's speech.
Wow, going back to the daily papers.
Yes, and he demonstrates how parliamentary transcripts were often retroactively smoothed over by the politicians themselves.
Oh, so Hansard was basically edited after the fact to make them sound better.
Exactly. And Engels proves that Marx was actually quoting a highly accurate, widely circulated press report of the speech as it was actually delivered on the floor.
That is just an exhausting, granular defense of Marx's academic integrity.
But he felt it was absolutely necessary.
And this obsessive dedication to theoretical clarity wasn't just directed at enemies like Brentano. He was equally rigorous with his closest ally.
Oh, absolutely. No one got a free pass.
The correspondence in volumes 49 and 50 shows Engels running what looks like a one-man international switchboard.
He is writing daily to Nikolai Danielson in Russia, Victor Adler in Vienna, August Bebel in Germany, Pablo Iglesias in Spain.
Just constantly managing all these distinct personalities and local conditions. But the letters that really stand out to me are his communications with a younger German intellectual, Franz Mehring.
Ah, yes. The letters to Mehring are some of the most theoretically rich documents in this entire collection.
Let's get into why. Mehring was writing a history of Germany, right?
Right. And he was applying the Marxist method of historical materialism, which basically the idea that the economic base of a society ultimately shapes its political and ideological superstructure.
The economy drives the culture, essentially.
Right. But Engels writes to Mehring to warn him against turning this method into a rigid paint-by-numbers dogma.
Yes. Engels explicitly says that younger writers were starting to use historical materialism as an excuse not to study history.
It became a shortcut.
It's like they were saying, well, economics determines everything, so I don't need to look at the specific cultural or legal nuances of this historical event. I can just assume the economic cause and move on.
Exactly. And Engels explains the mechanics of how historical materialism is actually supposed to work. He clarifies that while the economic foundation is the ultimate determining factor, the superstructure, the laws, the religions, the political institutions, they also exert their own influence on the course of historical struggles.
It's a two-way street.
It's a complex dialectical feedback loop. He is practically begging the next generation of scholars to appreciate the messy, contradictory reality of history rather than just slapping a crude economic formula onto every single problem.
But, reading all this, isn't there a profound tragedy woven into it?
How do you mean?
Well, we are looking at a man with a genius-level intellect of his own, and he's spending his 70s acting as a human shield against critics like Brentano, and acting as a tutor for younger writers who are misinterpreting his best friend's work.
All right.
And beyond all that, his absolute most agonizing task during these years was editing Volume 3 of Marx's Capital.
Which was a monumental undertaking.
Right, because Marx left behind mountains of barely legible, totally disorganized manuscripts. It was a chaotic mess of economic equations and fragmented thoughts.
It was famously difficult to read.
So when you look at how much of his own life Engels poured into deciphering someone else's handwriting, you have to wonder, did he secretly resent playing second fiddle?
That's the big question.
Was he suppressing his own original voice to be a glorified archivist?
It's a question that biographers have wrestled with for decades. But the evidence in these volumes strongly suggests that Engels did not view it as a sacrifice at all.
Really? Not at all.
No, he viewed it as the ultimate mission. Engels possessed a profound, almost unparalleled humility regarding his relationship with Marx.
He knew where he stood.
He genuinely believed that Marx's discovery of the mechanism of surplus value, exactly how profit is actively extracted from labor, was the singular world historic intellectual achievement of the 19th century.
So for Engels, piecing together Volume 3 wasn't an act of subservience.
Not at all. It was an act of safeguarding the most powerful theoretical weapon the working class could ever possess.
And the mechanical difficulty of that task just cannot be overstated. In a letter from 1893 to Stefan Bauer, we get a glimpse into just how deep into the economic weeds Engels had to go.
Oh, the stuff about the physiocrats.
Yes, they are discussing François Quesnay's Tableau économique and the physiocrats.
Right, so the physiocrats were this 18th century French school of economic thought.
Way before Marx.
Way before. And Quesnay's tableau was essentially the very first macroeconomic flow model. It attempted to map how wealth circulated through different classes in society, primarily based on agricultural production.
And Marx had studied them obsessively.
He did, because they were the first to try and analyze the structural laws of capital accumulation, even if they mistakenly thought all new value came only from the land.
So Engels brings us up to Bauer to highlight the sheer depth of historical economic modeling Marx was doing.
Exactly.
But applying those structural models to modern capitalism in Volume 3 of Capital was brutal work for Engels. He specifically notes in 1893 that Part 5 of the manuscript was the chief obstacle.
Part 5 is a beast.
It deals with the division of profit into interest and entrepreneurial income, right? And the entire mechanics of credit and the banking system.
And Marx's notes on the credit system were highly fragmented. They're written during different stages of his own understanding.
So it wasn't just a matter of transcribing.
No. Engels had to synthesize disjointed observations on interest-bearing capital, stock exchanges, and banking reserves into a coherent theoretical structure.
Without altering Marx's underlying intent.
Exactly. He was untangling the most abstract, complex mechanics of high finance, working from drafts that were essentially a genius arguing with himself on paper.
Just a total labyrinth. The fact that he managed to publish Volume 3 at all is a monumental feat of intellectual endurance.
It really is.
But here's what I find truly staggering. This exact same obsessive need to map the underlying math of capitalism wasn't just reserved for books and manuscripts.
I know, he applied it everywhere.
He applied it directly to the map of Europe. He was looking at the economic data of the 1890s and realizing it pointed straight toward a global war. Which brings us to the geopolitical chessboard.
This is where Engels' analytical foresight becomes truly chilling.
Right, because while he's editing the intricacies of the credit system in Capital, he is simultaneously publishing these highly detailed structural analyses of European geopolitics in Volume 27.
We're talking about pieces like The Situation in Europe and his absolutely brilliant pamphlet, Can Europe Disarm?
Let's just pause and look at the date on Can Europe Disarm? It was published in 1893.
21 years before the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Right. We are 2 decades out. The First World War is not even a blip on the radar for most conventional politicians.
They're all celebrating an era of relative European peace and massive economic expansion.
The Belle Epoque. Yet Engels is looking at the board and seeing that the pieces are locking themselves into a position where a continental slaughter is the only mathematical outcome.
Yes.
How does he see it so early? Like, what exactly is he looking at?
He sees it because he is applying the economic mechanisms he and Marx uncovered directly to the behavior of nation-states.
Okay, unpack that for us.
In Marxist theory, there is a core concept regarding the uneven development of capitalism, meaning nations do not industrialize at the exact same pace.
Someone is always pulling ahead.
Right. By the 1890s, Britain's absolute dominance as the workshop of the world is being aggressively challenged. Germany is industrializing at a breakneck speed. France is expanding its capital export. And Russia is beginning its own massive state-sponsored industrialization.
So it's a pressure cooker with no release valve.
Exactly.
Because if Germany is suddenly industrializing twice as fast, Their massive new factories require raw materials, right? And they need new foreign markets to sell all those manufactured goods.
They absolutely have to expand.
But the globe has largely already been partitioned by the older empires, primarily Britain and France. So to continue scaling economically, Germany physically has to challenge the existing geopolitical boundaries.
The economic competition directly necessitates a military buildup to back up their territorial claims.
It's unavoidable.
But Engels takes the analysis even deeper in Can Europe Disarm? He looks at how the technological advancements of the Industrial Revolution are transforming the nature of armies themselves.
Right. It's not just muskets and cavalry anymore.
No, he analyzes the implementation of universal conscription. We're talking about the transition from small professional armies to massive, sprawling citizen armies.
Millions of men.
Millions. And he looks at the rapid obsolescence of weapons technology.
Meaning the tech is moving so fast that you're constantly behind.
Yes. The moment a new artillery piece or repeating rifle is developed, every nation is forced to spend millions rearming their entire infantry just to avoid being outgunned.
Yeah, so he argues that the capitalist states are trapped in this vicious cycle.
A totally unsustainable cycle.
They absolutely need these massive, technologically advanced armies to defend their foreign economic interests and also to suppress their own domestic working classes.
Right.
But maintaining a standing army of millions of men and constantly updating their weaponry that places a crippling, unsustainable tax burden on the population.
Which, in turn, fuels the exact domestic unrest the state is trying to suppress in the first place.
It is a brilliantly observed paradox. It's a feedback loop of doom.
It really is. Engels concludes that this system of hyper-militarization is economically impossible to maintain indefinitely. It must eventually break.
And when it breaks.
He predicts a war of unprecedented devastation. A war where millions of men will slaughter each other using the most advanced industrial machinery available. He is literally predicting the trenches of World War I 2 decades before they are dug.
It's bone-chilling treat, and he also connects this military decay to deep, systemic financial decay.
Yes, they go hand in hand.
Let's bring up another fascinating piece from Volume 27. It's called The Italian Panama. Now, to a modern reader, that title sounds like a Netflix documentary about a geopolitical money laundering scandal.
And honestly, that is essentially exactly what it was.
So what does Panama refer to here?
The title references the French Panama Canal scandal, which was this massive corruption case where French politicians were systematically bribed to hide the total financial ruin of the canal company.
Okay, so Panama just became shorthand for massive financial corruption.
Exactly. And Engels is applying that same lens to Italy, writing this multi-part expose on the Banca Romana scandal.
Looking at the Italian Panama, it seems like Engels is arguing that the state isn't just suffering from a few bad apples. He's saying the state has literally been purchased by speculative finance.
It's been entirely co-opted.
The mechanics of the scandal are staggering. The Banca Romana had a state monopoly to print currency, right?
One of the few banks allowed to do so.
And they illegally printed millions of extra lire, literally running duplicate banknotes to cover their massive losses from speculative real estate investment.
Just printing money in the basement to hide their gambling debts.
And then they used that illegal money to directly pay off the Italian prime minister and dozens of parliament members to keep them quiet and ensure favorable legislation.
It is the ultimate fusion of state power and financial capital.
It's unbelievable.
And Engels uses this scandal to illustrate a structural shift in late 19th century capitalism. The state apparatus is no longer just managing the economy, it is actively being hijacked by speculative bankers.
And Engels connects this directly back to the danger of war.
Right. He does. Because when a state's foreign policy is dictated by the erratic, high-risk needs of corrupt financial speculators desperately trying to cover their losses,
that state's military posturing becomes incredibly volatile.
Exactly.
If the government is corrupt at the level of literally running illegal printing presses in the national bank, how can you trust them with the keys to a mass conscript army equipped with modern artillery?
You can't. It's a powder keg.
It is a terrifying realization. You see him mapping out this nexus of corrupt banking, desperate politicians, and heavy weaponry, and you just realize how incredibly sharp and adaptive his mind was in his mid-70s.
Highly adaptive. And what is perhaps most remarkable is that his intellect was not rigidly confined to political economy or military strategy.
Right.
To truly understand Engels' worldview, you have to look at his enduring fascination with the entirety of the human experience.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because buried in volume 27, amidst all these geopolitical warnings and dense economic defenses, there is this piece titled, quote, "A Newly Discovered Case of Group Marriage."
It stands out, doesn't it?
It really does. I read that and immediately thought, wait, why is the patriarch of European socialism suddenly writing an anthropological essay on group marriage?
It seems like a detour, but it is actually the bedrock of his entire philosophical framework.
Okay, lay that out for us.
To understand why he cares about group marriage in 1892, we have to look back at his monumental 1884 book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State.
Right, a classic text.
In that work, Engels relied heavily on the research of Lewis H. Morgan, who was an American anthropologist who lived among the Iroquois and studied Native American kinship structures.
Morgan's work, Ancient Society, completely blew open the Victorian assumption that the patriarchal, monogamous nuclear family was the eternal, natural default for human beings.
Right, exactly. Morgan discovered that early human societies operated on completely different kinship systems, such as the consanguine or Pinaluan family structures.
Which essentially functioned as forms of group marriage within specific tribal constraints.
Yes. And Engels seized upon this data because it provided empirical historical proof for a foundational Marxist claim
What is?
that human social structures are not fixed by biology or divine law. They are highly fluid, and they evolve in direct response to changes in the economic base.
Let's break down that mechanism for you listening. How does property dictate family structure?
It's all about wealth accumulation.
Right. Engels argues that in early human history, when survival required communal labor and property was held commonly by the tribe, the family structure was also communal.
Group marriage made perfect sense because the entire tribe raised the children collectively.
But when agriculture and domestication of animals allow for the creation of surplus wealth, specifically wealth controlled by individual men, the whole system breaks down.
Precisely, because once a man accumulates significant private wealth, say herds of cattle, large tracts of land, he wants to ensure that this wealth is passed down exclusively to his own biological heirs.
But in a group marriage structure, maternity is obvious, but paternity is basically impossible to prove.
You don't know who the father is for sure.
Therefore, to ensure the secure inheritance of private property, the communal structure was violently overthrown and replaced by the strict monogamous patriarchal family.
Where the woman's primary social function was essentially narrowed to producing legitimate heirs for the transfer of capital.
It's a brutal analysis. So when Engels is writing A Newly Discovered Case of Group Marriage in his 70s, he isn't just casually reading trivia.
Yeah, at all.
He is actively hunting for new anthropological data that validates historical materialism.
Exactly. If the structure of the family changed once due to the rise of private property, it proves that the family can be entirely restructured again when private property is abolished.
He is looking for scientific proof that human nature is adaptable.
It reveals a mind that absolutely refuses to compartmentalize knowledge. For Engels, you cannot understand economics without understanding anthropology, and you cannot understand politics without understanding biology.
Everything is connected.
His letters from volumes 49 and 50 show a man voraciously consuming data from every possible discipline.
The scope of his correspondence is just exhausting to look at. I mean, he is actively engaging with the emerging women's movement. He's exchanging these deeply technical letters with Danielson about the Russian Obshchina.
Ah, the traditional village commune.
Right. They are intensely debating the mechanics of Russian agriculture to figure out if Russia could somehow use these ancient communal structures to leapfrog directly into socialism.
Just completely bypassing the horrors of industrial capitalism.
Exactly. And he is doing all this while also engaging with the mainstream bourgeois press.
And media engagements are fascinating. They really show he wasn't hiding in an ivory tower. A great example is his 1892 interview with the correspondent of the French newspaper, Leclerc.
In that interview, he is fielding incredibly hostile questions about anarchism, defending the movement against associations with terrorism, and clearly articulating his vision to the general public.
He is completely fluent in the modern media landscape.
And this intellectual vitality remains completely undiminished, even as his physical health begins to severely fail him in the mid-1890s.
It's actually quite tragic. He is suffering from esophageal cancer.
Which makes speaking and eventually eating incredibly painful.
Yes. Yet he is still dictating letters and analyzing geopolitical shifts. Knowledge, for Engels, was the ultimate tool for human emancipation, and he was obsessively sharpening that tool right up until the end.
Which really brings us to the final months of his life. It's a period where the massive, sweeping theories of history have to abruptly narrow down to the cold, legal practicalities of mortality.
Even a titan like Engels had to face the end.
And the documents in Volume 50 detail his final works and his meticulous end-of-life planning.
It is striking how active and combative he remained. His final major writings are not quiet reflections or, gentle memoirs.
They're not a victory lap.
No, they are profound, highly controversial tactical texts. The most significant among them is his 1895 introduction to Karl Marx's The Class Struggles in France, 1848 to 1850.
In this introduction, Engels is looking back at the failed revolutions of 1848, but he is doing it to completely reassess the tactical realities of the present day.
He's updating the playbook.
He acknowledges a massive shift in how political power can be seized. He essentially states that the days of the classic street barricade, the romantic image of small bands of armed workers spontaneously overthrowing a government in a weekend, those days are definitively over.
He is applying that exact same military analysis we saw in Can Europe Disarm? He outlines the mechanics of why the barricade is obsolete. It's entirely logistical. The modern capitalist state now possesses mass railways to transport thousands of troops in hours.
You can't surprise them anymore.
No. And the streets of major cities, like Haussmann's Paris, have been deliberately widened.
Oh, to prevent the construction of barricades in the first place.
Exactly. And to allow for clear lines of fire from modern long-range artillery. Against repeating rifles and organized supply chains, a spontaneous street revolt is a mathematical suicide mission.
So if the barricade is obsolete, what does Engels say is the new mechanism for revolution?
He argues that the working class must master the art of utilizing universal suffrage.
Voting.
Yes. They have to use parliamentary democracy, the legal election campaigns, the party press to build a massive, undeniable majority power before any systemic change can occur.
But this text caused a massive scandal within his own ranks, didn't it?
Oh, it caused an enormous controversy. Because the leadership of the German Social Democratic Party, the very people he had been warning about opportunism earlier, they took his manuscript and secretly edited it before publication.
Unbelievable. They censored his writing.
They did. They removed all of his caveats about the ultimate theoretical right to revolution. And they published an edited version that made it seem like Friedrich Engels was advocating exclusively for peaceful, legal, parliamentary action forever.
They basically tried to turn him into a moderate liberal on his deathbed.
Exactly. And when Engels saw the published version, he was absolutely furious.
I can imagine.
He wrote these scathing letters to Karl Kautsky and others, protesting this deliberate distortion. He insisted that he was merely advising a specific tactical shift for the present moment in Germany, given the current military imbalance.
It wasn't a blanket rule for all time.
No, he absolutely refused to relinquish the historical right to revolution. It demonstrates that up until his dying breath, he was a fiercely independent thinker.
Willing to fight his own party's leadership to protect the integrity of the theoretical foundation.
Yes.
And while he is fighting these final intellectual battles, he is also drawing up the paperwork for his own exit. Volume 50 contains some deeply personal, highly specific legal documents.
The wills.
Right. We have his will and codicil of July 29th, 1893. We have the intricate letter to the executors on November 14th, 1894. And finally, the last codicil of July 26, 1895, signed just over a week before his death.
These wills are fascinating historical artifacts because they expose the incredible burden of responsibility he carried.
He wasn't just dividing up a personal bank account or a house.
No, he was legally transferring the intellectual property and the historical archive of a global revolutionary movement.
It is the ultimate succession planning. If you are the single intellectual patriarch holding all the disparate threads of this movement together, how do you divide your estate to ensure the entire apparatus doesn't collapse into factional warfare the moment you die?
It's a huge problem, and he approaches it with extreme, calculated precision.
He chooses trusted figures, right? Primarily August Bebel and Edward Bernstein to manage the literary estate.
Yes. He gives highly specific instructions regarding the custody of Marx's unpublished manuscripts, his own vast library, and the thousands of letters of ongoing correspondence.
He is basically attempting to build a legal firewall around the theoretical legacy,
ensuring it will be preserved, translated, and published without being destroyed by state authorities or buried by political rivals.
You can really see him effectively passing the torch in his final letters to the next generation of leaders, people like Stanislaw Mendelssohn or Pablo Iglesias.
The tone shifts noticeably.
It does. He is offering his final pieces of strategic advice, but he is forcing them to take the reins. He knows he won't be there to answer their questions much longer.
And he manages it all, securing the archives, ensuring the financial survival of Marx's surviving children, organizing his legal affairs with the exact same cold, methodical care he applied to deciphering the economic equations of capital.
Shortly after signing that final codicil in July 1895, his physical capacity gives out. He passes away on August 5, 1895.
The end of an era.
And he leaves behind a legacy and a theoretical framework that would fundamentally dictate the course of the 20th century.
Truly.
Well, it's time to step back and look at the whole picture for you listening. We started this journey by dropping into the 1890s, witnessing the explosive, terrifying scaling of the working class movement, with millions taking to the streets and the ballot boxes.
A global awakening.
We saw Engels act as the ultimate quality control officer, fighting the dilution of opportunism and rigorously defending Marx's raw data against academic sabotage from critics like Brentano.
We watched him do the grueling, mind-bending math to complete Volume 3 of Capital.
And then apply that exact same structural logic to the map of Europe, predicting the industrial slaughter of World War I by analyzing the frantic, uneven development of capitalist empires and the corrupt fusion of state power and speculative banking.
We explored his profound, enduring curiosity, too, showing how a deep dive into the anthropological history of group marriage provided the bedrock for his belief that human nature can actually be transformed.
And finally, we witnessed his meticulous succession planning, legally securing the theoretical archives before the clock ran out.
It is a staggering portrait of an intellect fully engaged with the mechanics of its historical moment.
It really is. But if we're going to leave you with something to truly ponder today, we have to examine the central, haunting contradiction of these final 5 years.
The contradiction between his politics and his military analysis.
Exactly. Engels spent his twilight years filled with an intense, calculated optimism. He looked at the election returns in Germany, the surging union memberships in England, the massive coordination of the Second International, and he genuinely saw the mathematical certainty of the working class movement's eventual triumph.
He believed, down to his bones, that the future belonged to them.
Yes. Yet at the exact same time, he wrote, "Can Europe disarm?" He looked at the uneven industrialization, the desperate scramble for markets, and the massive accumulation of modern artillery.
And he clearly saw a terrifying mechanical buildup toward a catastrophic continental war.
He saw an impending slaughter that would mobilize and destroy millions of the very workers he was relying on to build his new world.
It's a massive paradox.
He is a man standing on the edge of the 20th century, looking at the data, and seeing both the dawn of human emancipation and the absolute abyss of industrial slaughter simultaneously.
It must have been a heavy burden to carry.
So the question for you to mull over is this. How do you balance the ultimate hope for human progress with the analytical foresight that a catastrophic war is mathematically inevitable?
Did his deep belief in economic theory give him a false sense of security, making him believe that his political movement could somehow easily survive and triumph over the coming imperialist meat grinder?
Or was he exactly right about the terrifying century to come, understanding with cold scientific detachment that the old world would inevitably have to tear itself apart with artillery and trenches before a new social structure could ever be built?
That's a question that history is still trying to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Volume 27 and the final years of Engels. We hope it helped illuminate the complex mechanics behind these historical texts. Stay curious, keep reading, and always look for the hidden structures shaping the world around you.